This podcast is brought to you by Deepbridge Capital LLP. Deepbridge is authorised and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. Please note that investments discussed are both illiquid and high risk and won't be suitable for all investors and should be considered as part of a diversified portfolio. The content of this podcast should not be construed as financial or taxation advice. We recommend investors seek appropriate professional financial advice. Any views expressed may no longer be current and may have already been acted upon. Welcome to this latest Deepbridge Discovery Podcast. The idea of these podcasts is to bring to life the people and the companies behind what Deepbridge do. I'm delighted today to be joined by Bernard Ross, CEO and founder of Sky Medical Technology, an investee company within the Deepbridge Technology Growth EIS fund. So Bernard, great to have you. Great to catch up.
Great to be here. Thanks very much for the invite.
So on these things, I always like to start at the beginning. I think it's a good place to start. So can you just tell us kind of how Sky came to be and the background of that?
Yeah, sure. So I trained in accountancy. I got involved in building up businesses, fast-moving consumer goods start off with, and then got into licensing of technology. I was working in for another company in a role of finding early-stage pharmaceutical technologies. Okay. And while I was doing that, I came across this idea in the heads of two very bright doctors in the UK. It was to do with medical technology rather than pharmaceuticals. Okay. So I commissioned research into the market. Looked like a great market to be in. Very sensibly, my board rejected the idea. So I said, well, in that case, I'm doing it.
Yeah, you have to do it myself.
Because I was used to building up businesses. Yep. And my track record is building up teams of people and then enabling them to progress in the area they're involved in. So it actually came reasonably naturally to me to set up the right kind of people in different therapy areas. Yep. So we set up the company in the UK, and we started developing the products, the patents, raised EIS funds, yep. And that enabled us to grow from the ground up.
And what is it Sky does? What was the idea that you originally saw, and kind of what made you think, hang on a sec, this has got a great potential?
So, having some medical background, I was aware of my area of medicine that I was finding new products for was in cardiovascular medicine. Okay. So I knew a little bit about blood flow. Yep. And if you are able to maintain healthy blood flow, there are many things that you can help when it comes to medicine. Sure. And this technology essentially does exactly that. It enables the body to circulate blood when the body is at rest, and therefore it isn't doing it itself. We all know about the heart pushing blood out, but actually it's the pumps in the calf muscle and in the thigh, but mainly in the calf muscle, that generates blood as you walk, brings blood back towards the heart. And that's what our technology does. It puts electrical current once a second through a very specific nerve at the side of the knee that then branches and goes into the muscles and squeezes the muscles to push this blood flow back towards the heart. And in doing so, it reduces the risk of blood clots. Okay. And that's used in hospitals in the UK, for example, yep. To reduce blood clots after, say, someone's had a stroke, reduce the risk of a blood clot, a DVT, yep. or pulmonary embolism, which is saving lives in the UK. It's being used to reduce swelling. If you keep blood moving, then other fluids get absorbed into the blood system. So if you've got a knee operation, for example, the knee swells, very painful. It does mean that people come back into the hospital, very expensive for the health system. Yep. So if you reduce that swelling, then you reduce the cost of the hospital and increase patient comfort and reduce the risk of things like surgeries going wrong, a knee replacement, for example.
So I guess it's for healthcare systems, is that less time in bed, less time in hospital. That's the cost saving that they're making.
Yeah, and as well, length of care. So yep. Because we increase blood flow, we increase it to the skin on the leg, for example. So if someone's got a wound that won't heal, yep. a venous leg ulcer, diabetic ulcer, then we can actually increase the blood flow to the ulcer. Okay. And it would be no surprise that if you increase blood flow to a wound, it then goes on to heal. And that will save the health system a lot of money, takes away a lot of pain yep. and discomfort from patients. And also in the case of diabetes, it reduces the risk of that leg being amputated, which is a life
which is a positive event. Generally. Yes. Yeah. So I guess, is that your primary market is the healthcare system. So kind of where are you with the NHS to date?
So we started our work in the UK.
Yep.
The clinical data started off in the UK as well. So naturally, our links are with hospitals in the UK.
Yep.
And we found that we got nice guidance. National Institute of Care Excellence evaluated our technology and said, this is something that should be used in the NHS, across the NHS, for when someone can't use other things to reduce the risk of blood clots.
Yep.
So we found that we were getting evaluated in stroke centres, and there are 85 specialist stroke centres throughout the UK. Each see about 1,000 stroke patients a year. And they were using our device when they can't use, for example, compression pumps. Compression pumps are used to squeeze the legs. Our device does it using the body's own internal system.
Okay.
And the compliance with our product, the patient adherence, and that people liked the product, the nurses did. So that's getting more and more data, and that's being used.
So as part of that then for the nurses, for the treatment, etc., it's about being easy to use, I guess, is it?
Absolutely right. It's patient compliance, patient adherence to other products, such as external compression of the leg.
Yep.
So these big bags that are connected to compression pumps squeeze the leg, quite uncomfortable. It tethers the patient to the bed because they're tied by these huge hoses to a bit of kit, and they're trying to promote mobility in these patients. Whereas our device is wearable; it's the size of a wristwatch, but you wear it by the knee. And it's much easier for the patient to tolerate it. Patients sleep with our device on rather than their legs being squeezed every 90 seconds and it waking them up. So we find that patient adherence, as it's called now, I call it patient compliance, is much better with our product. We find that the nurses like it because it doesn't interfere with the patient in the bed. It's much easier to use. And actually they're discovering that, and it's now been published, that our device is actually better at reducing the risk of blood clots compared to the other products.
Excellent.
And that's in a prospective study that was carried out in just over 2,000 patients in the UK. So that adoption started off really quickly. We started selling at the beginning of 2019 in the UK. Of our target population, we got nearly 10% market penetration our first year, which is huge in the NHS. Then COVID hit, so everything flatlined.
Absolutely.
But now we're going to get to about 22% penetration in our first full second year of sales.
Fantastic. You must be delighted with that.
Very, very pleased with that. I mean, one of the academic health science networks has said that we're the fastest adopted technology in the NHS since the history of the NHS. I think that might be a bit flippant, but it's good to see that.
That's a quote for the website, isn't it? That's, you know.
Well, I think that may say more about the NHS than it does about the products. But
yeah, that's a conversation for another day. But so, okay, you talked about those kind of those things. What other milestones has the company gone through over the journey to date?
I think the key milestones, if you look from a business point of view, I mean, I'm in a very fortunate position that whereas I've got people who specialize in clinical studies, other people specialize in regulatory. We've got a team of about 35 people. I get to look over the whole of the company a lot of the time. So I see the bigger picture. Whilst people are looking at the very focused areas, I get to look at everything. So whilst there have been some very significant milestones, such as clearance to sell the product in the US, FDA clearance, CE marking,
massive,
nice approval. I think one of the key milestones for me is the metrics around saving lives. If you look at just in the UK, for example, 8% of people who have a stroke go on to have a significant blood clot afterwards that is life-threatening. So if you're talking about in each hospital, they have about 1,000 stroke patients a year in the key 85 centres. That means that every year, 8% of those are 80 people. So if we're eliminating that risk, which it looks like we are, not just reducing it, but it looks like the data's saying we're pretty much eliminating it, that means that every month we're saving lives throughout the whole of the UK. And that's probably, those kind of metrics are probably the milestones that we all find the most rewarding.
Absolutely.
So a gentleman who works for our distributor in Canada, a gentleman called Jeff Forney. Now, he's been working in medical devices for 40 years. Excuse me. He gets letters from patients who got the leg attached to their body when it was going to be cut off because of poor circulation.
That's powerful.
That's powerful. And he actually tells a story where he received an email from a patient telling this. He was in a store about to buy something in a store, and he actually broke down and started crying because he says, I've been in this business for 40 years. You don't get reactions like that of patients. And seeing those kind of milestones, that kind of change, the ability to affect people in that way really does spur my team on. I've been very fortunate to attract people who come from some very big companies. So, and they instead of being a small cog in a big machine, they can see the difference that
they're
their
specifically
work
making
into patients' lives. And I think they're probably the milestones that, and people's investments into our company, they can see that their investments, as well as hopefully making them a healthy return, is also improving patients' lives.
And ultimately, that's why you guys do what you do, and that's ultimately one of the great reasons why we invest in medtech and life sciences companies specifically, because it's a market which needs disruption, needs changing to solve some of these massive issues.
I think you're right. It's funny in my industry, whilst we do have what's called a disruptive technology, the less disruptive it actually is, the easier it gets into the care pathway, the more successful you're going to be.
Absolutely.
So having a non-disruptive technology that can change a market is probably the most successful thing you can do.
Well, and I guess kind of changing behaviour and approach to organisations like the NHS, which I think we all know is a beer moth of an organisation. That must take time, and that must take significant evidence to be able to do that. So that must have been part of your early stage of your development.
Yes, and it's a continual process. If you're looking at, say, for things like the next steps and the next milestones for us, so the clinical data that is required to change a care pathway is significant. You need to start off with the mechanism of action. Is what you do, in our case, increasing blood flow, can you show that it actually does do that? That's one. Two, can you get it seen through literature search or get the key opinion leaders in that therapy area to actually say, well, that increased blood flow is going to benefit my patients. So, for example, in wound patients, does increased blood flow help heal those wounds? The third thing you've got to do then is say, well, does that increased blood flow genuinely increase healing of wounds? And the fourth thing you have to do is show the health economics. You have to show that increased blood flow that heals wounds at an accelerated rate actually means that each pound that is spent in a social care system delivers more value than a pound spent on something else.
Absolutely.
And that means that healthcare becomes sustainable. In all systems, even the US system, which we think of as an economic system, they have the largest social healthcare system in the world still, Medicare and Medicaid. So actually, within the multiple systems in the US, they have a very, very large social healthcare system. So everyone is looking for value in taxpayers'
So that health economics still has an important part, no matter how deep the pockets might seem from a kind of an envious side of this pond.
Yes. Yeah, that's correct.
Okay. So obviously, any organisation as you've grown, you've talked about some of the milestones you have to go through and the kind of key factors. What challenges have you kind of faced or overcome during that period, kind of going through that clinical evidence and what have you? And obviously we've had a global pandemic over the last few years, and you said I guess kind of 3 years on, you've just had your second year of trading, if you like, so that must have had a direct impact. What have been those challenges that you faced kind of at a macro and micro level?
So we have a platform technology. It increases blood flow, and that's, as I said at the earlier on, that is applicable in many different areas for many different patient groups. So you have to prioritize those. You can't do everything in one go. So we've had to continually prioritize what therapy area is going to deliver the most benefit for our investors' funds over a period of time. So where does our product fit?
And is that because that then leads on to other things? If you can prove concept with the quick wins, if you like, I know nothing's quick in the medtech world, but the quick wins you can then build on and do other.
Yes, I think that's quite right. Now, some people say focus on one thing and one thing only, and that's correct. But coming from a pharmaceutical background, we're used to having a range of what we call analogues of different compounds. And whilst they have the fundamental same mechanism of action, they will be applicable in different patient groups. So you can have one lead approach, and then you lead with that for one patient group. Then you'll have another program that looks at the next patient group and onwards. And these will be time phased. And actually, that's the biggest challenge of all, is managing time, because time burns through funds.
It does.
If you find a clinical study is going to take an extra month, well, that's an extra month of cash burn. So you have to make sure that if a project is look like it's going to go on too long, you have to be ready to kill it. And then use your funds and your resources in the most effective way possible. So I think time is probably the biggest challenge.
And I guess that was elongated then with the global pandemic.
Absolutely. So we were well supported with, we had some revenues. We got revenues increased over the pandemic as well, slightly, because our product is a mobile form of blood clot prevention. So that was used in the Nightingale centres and places like that. But that was short-lived. Ironically, our cash burn went down because we were travelling less. Our clinical studies, sadly, though, stopped completely. Every wound clinic closed. Every health system throughout the world was looking at nothing except COVID. So all of the things that would increase the value of our business essentially stopped. So my cash runway increased. But we needed additional funds to see us through the gap. And we got that from the Future Fund, existing shareholders, phenomenally well supported by investors. I think the other challenge is change in a health system. I think with any med tech company, after a period of time, you cease to be a technology company. You become a care pathway change company. You have to find ways of find out where the care pathway is. The care pathway is how someone is cared for in a hospital. It will be done a certain way. There are protocols that exist for looking after patients. And if you're saying to any health system, orthopedic surgery or wound care or anything at all, change what you're doing because here might be a slightly improved way of doing it, then every system is resistant to change. So you have to become a care pathway change organisation.
And I guess humans are renowned for being irrational. So therefore, you might be able to demonstrate absolutely why they need to be doing this, etc. But you'll still have people going, "This is how we've always done it." And I guess that's kind of a critical issue in that sector.
It is, and you'll find that there are people who want to be thought leaders in their particular discipline. Some people are earlier adopters of technology. So you have to find ways of finding them. They then have to you have to make sure that they are in their own organisation. They're also empowered to affect change.
Absolutely.
And you have to find the stakeholders who can work with them to make those change. So I think the challenge is mapping out the organisations you want to influence
and identifying the people that are willing to change and willing to come on the journey with you, I guess.
Now, some systems are more adept at change. They are few and far between.
So kind of from your personal background, I mean, you mentioned about FMCG before. So going from an FMCG environment, what are the kind of differences or the similarities, I guess, between the medtech world and kind of the FMCG? I guess it's probably not as immediate. It's probably longer term strategy, etc. But what are the differences and what are the similarities?
That's a very interesting question. I think the similarities are in all markets. The market ultimately is correct. You can come out with a product you think that your customers should adopt this product, and they will say, well, that's nice, but actually we like this product. So you have to understand your audience for every single marketing message that you have and the needs of each stakeholder. In healthcare, you have a lot of stakeholders. You've got the payers, who are the people who provide the money. You've got providers such as hospitals who actually provide the care, and within those, each individual person and each person has a role will have their own individual drivers of what they are targeted to achieve. So you have to make sure that each one of those gets their needs met by supplying the new product. The difference is, and I don't think that's any different from any other market, I think the difference is the opportunity for impact in healthcare is actually quite profound. But you need a huge amount of tenacity to get there. And I think the further difference as well is that it takes longer to affect change.
Everything takes longer, I guess, in that world. So kind of looking forward, Bernard, obviously, what are the next goals, objectives, kind of the short version, what's next?
So we've just completed a randomized controlled trial in wound care, and the results will be published shortly. Can't talk about them too much here, obviously, because they're about to be published. But we do, when we shared them under NDA with the wound companies, it's generating a lot of very positive interest. So much so that we've engaged the services of KPMG to help us find the right partner for wound healing. And this will be, because it's a big global market, it's in the community, it's a highly fragmented market. So instead of setting up our own sales force, we're going to work with other companies.
Which is what you've done previously as well, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely right. And I think they're on a larger scale here, though. We may sign up with 1 or 2 companies globally. Now, whilst we would like to go for distribution, larger companies like to own things. So there would have to be either immediately or long-term some sort of mechanism potentially for distribution to change, potentially to some sort of transaction. So that's something we're looking at in the immediate future. We've now engaged KPMG. And shortly following that, it's highly likely then, therefore, that will be some liquidity for investors and shareholders.
A word our investors always like to hear, so that's great news.
For us, I think instead of having a single liquidity event, we'd like to have multiple stabs at this, because the technology is applicable in the community, but it's also applicable in hospitals, but the hospitals are the end customer. And that's an area that we'd like to develop further. Currently being used for DVT prevention, also for reduction of swelling.
You've got these other sectors that you work in as well.
So one, for example, that we'd like to add to that is, whilst the devices are being used for DVT prevention, reducing blood clots after stroke, and that's been used in multiple centres in the UK and now in the US as well, and other parts of the world, it looks like that the use of the device while it's being used for blood clot prevention also seems to be reducing the impact of the stroke itself.
Wow.
That's really interesting.
That's phenomenal.
So building up a program that looks at, well, how is it doing this? What's the mechanism of action? And actually quantifying that to a level of statistical significance is actually something that would be of immense value. And we would like to pursue that ourselves.
Wow, brilliant. I mean, you talked about kind of multiple vertical markets, that that's what kind of our language that we always use when we're talking about kind of investee companies and what we look for, etc. But what do you see long term being the key focus, or the one kind of market that you're going to be in going forward, or your main driver?
The US is the largest healthcare market in the world. It does have a mixture of social systems and also insurance-based reimbursements or out-of-pocket reimbursements as well. People buy things as well. So I think the US geographically is somewhere that you have to focus on. I think from a therapeutic point of view, which patient groups you want to go for, we think critical care is probably the area, as well as wound healing. We think critical care is going to be really important. By that, I mean things that are the high impact stories within a hospital. Intensive care, reducing the length of stay in intensive care. The clinical data is showing that when you add Gecko to the care pathway in intensive care, you can reduce the length of stay by a full day. And in some healthcare systems, that's 15,000, 14,000 pounds a day. But the quicker you get someone out of intensive care, the higher the chances are of long-term survival, and the less impact there is from whatever condition they're in the first place. Acute heart failure, where someone is in hospital because their heart failure is getting worse and the drugs need to be rebalanced, that's a role I think we can play in again. Reducing length of stay in hospital, so the patient care becomes much more cost effective. So intensive care, heart failure, and also, as I mentioned before, stroke. Saving lives and reducing the impact of the stroke is something we'd really like to focus on.
And then I guess alongside all the clinical stuff, you've also got effectively sports recovery, etc., and things like that. Is that kind of a nice add-on to kind of what you do? Is that kind of, or is that a nice marketing piece, or kind of what's the role of the Firefly product there?
Well, we're focused as a business on healthcare
Yep.
and medical type healthcare.
Yep.
We have a distributor in the US who from a very early stage said that our devices will help recovery after for professional athletes
Yep.
after a baseball game, an American football game. So we did rebrand the product
Yep.
as Firefly
Yep.
to stop any confusion into the medical market. What we have found is that this use of accelerated recovery is gaining pace. So it's now in 70% of the sports franchises in the US, and the depth at which it's being used, the frequency it's being used on a club-by-club basis is increasing all the time.
Brilliant.
So their revenues have doubled every year for the past 3 years, and it's growing more.
Fantastic.
And they've only really scratched the surface. What we have found in America, because of the links between the doctors who look after elite sports clubs, so the Washington Wizards, the LA Lakers, people like that, the doctors who service them also have their own clients for orthopedic surgery. So they tend to say, I know this is going to help you, Mrs. Jones, because I've used it on the LA Lakers, and it helps them recover. So this link between post-sports recovery, particularly in the US, and orthopedic recovery is actually quite strong. And it's a solid marketing tool, but it's also backed by evidence as well.
Absolutely. Brilliant. Good. So you've been there, you've created where you are now, and we talked about your kind of background prior to that. We work with a number of early stage companies from seed stage onwards, etc. What would your kind of words of wisdom be to entrepreneurs that, particularly in the medtech or the life sciences space? What would your words of wisdom, or kind of what would you tell them to watch out for or do particularly?
That's interesting. So I can think of some very specific occasions where I wish I'd had advice 2 years earlier, because we fell into a small hole that if we had the advice 2 years earlier and listened to it, wouldn't have happened. But they're quite niche and specific.
Sure.
So to go more generally, I'd say the opportunities for impact in healthcare are huge.
Yep.
But I think as any decent business person perhaps would realize, tenacity is key. You have to know that things will be challenging. If it was easy, someone else would have already done it.
Yep.
You also invariably are finding something that's backed by patents.
Yep.
You want to be backed by patents, which means you are doing something new.
Yep.
If it wasn't you wouldn't have got the patents in the first place.
Sure.
And if you're doing something new, then you are challenging the current ways of doing things.
Yep. The kind of status quo.
The status quo. And that is counterintuitive for healthcare. Healthcare likes creating protocols and sticking to those protocols in the belief, quite rightly, by doing something again and again the same way, you'll get reasonably good at it.
Yep.
And therefore the risk to your patients is probably reduced. If you're saying to them, and now tweak that and do something slightly different, there is a learning curve. And the fear is that the quality of what someone's doing will dip before it gets better. So you have to make sure that whatever you're trying to introduce in the care system is as easy to adopt as possible and disrupts the existing care pathway as little as possible.
And I guess you need to have the qualitative and quantitative research to back that up. It's not just hearsay or your say.
Have your evidence.
Yep.
Going out too early without the evidence that is really the right evidence to have would probably be a mistake. Don't spend money on sales and marketing until you know you've got your complete package of clinical data and health economic data. And the messaging for each stakeholder as well has to be very, very clear. I think, again, as I mentioned before, at some point you become a change organization, but you need to find the change people. So look for the people in the health system you're trying to influence, who are the people who will work with you, but from the inside of your customer to help affect change.
And I guess they've got to have the interest and the knowledge, but also the kudos to force change or make change happen, I guess.
It can be. You've got to find out what their drivers are. I mean, I've seen people in hospitals in tears of frustration trying to affect change. And in the end, sometimes do the most desperate of things to affect that change. And it's frustrating for them to have to go through that, but learn to support them. And one of our people, Sue Davenport, who's worked in communications in large healthcare companies for many, many years, she put in place for us a partnership program to help us find the people who are looking to make change in their organizations.
So rather than you going out looking, you're almost asking people to come to you who are
Yes.
wanting to make change. Okay,
Yeah.
interesting, very good. And then kind of following on from that, we have invested companies at Deepbridge, kind of from Aberdeen down to Kent and Northern Ireland, Wales, Scotland, etc. When we often travel abroad and things and speak to people and everyone, the feedback we always get is the UK is a great place to start and scale a business. What's kind of your experience, and would you agree with that first and foremost, and secondly, kind of why is that the case?
So there are many supporting mechanisms in the UK for business to start and flourish. If you look at EIS, for example, I can't think of anywhere else in the world where we've got this amount of support. That's government-backed support for the right kind of investments going to qualifying businesses, and it's tremendous.
Cheers.
If you look at the grants that are available from Innovate UK, great grant support as well. You've got systems such as the Academic Health Science Networks in the UK that look to disseminate best practice as quickly as possible. That's getting change in the health system is a struggle. But if you do it in the UK, you get great experience of what it's going to take to influence stakeholders in many different health systems all over the world. I don't want to be as trite as saying if you can do it here, you can do it anywhere. That's not the case. But it gives you really good experience.
Please don't sing either. Yeah, nobody needs that.
No one needs that. Second only to my dancing. If you are able to map out a health system such as the NHS, that's applicable in multiple health systems in different parts of the world. So breaking your teeth here.
And again, a lot of people have fed back to us as well that if you get that NHS stamp, then that carries great weight around the world as well.
It does. The NHS is a respected system, and it's known to be a highly fragmented system. The only way of getting your products really used, your medical products really used in NHS, is through evidence. And you have to resell that evidence almost on a clinician by clinician basis. There's no front door to the NHS. And you have to justify why someone is using your product repeatedly. It's not a single committee that you go to, and if you can influence them, you're in. You have to win it on a doctor by doctor basis, and it means that you continually have to make sure that your arguments are hitting home and are backed by evidence, and that will carry you well all over the world.
Brilliant. I think from one of my favourite anecdotes from an IFA who recommended a client invest in the Deepbridge EIS fund, and Sky was one of their companies. And a little while after they'd invested, they were had to take their son to A&E after a footballing accident. The son was fine, by the way. But in the A&E, there was either a poster or there was a leaflet or something about the Gecko device. And he took a selfie with it and sent it to his IFA saying, this is what we invest in, isn't it? This is great. And it just brought that tangibility to kind of what we do, etc. for an investor.
Yeah, it is. It's true. It's really nice to hear stories like that. The one that I was told recently was by Angela Thelma, commercial director, where we've got a distributor in the UK called GNN, who look after hospitals in the UK for us for DVT prevention. They go into the stroke wards. They were at a medical conference in the UK, and a leading stroke clinician came up to them, looking at the Gecko device, saying, "This is tremendous. I really want to try this. I want to be one of the first people who's using this in the UK." And he's from a large trust in the UK. And he said, is there anyone else using it? Yes, every single trust geographically all around you. Really? Well, why aren't I using it? You tell us.
Yeah, absolutely. Brilliant. So hopefully now they're an adopter, so that's good. So kind of away from Sky, which is fascinating, we could talk for hours, but we always do try and in these podcasts just try and bring it back to the people behind what we do and things as well. So, you've traveled the globe with Sky doing things and distributing and what have you and what have you, but outside of that globe trotting and kind of your kind of I wouldn't say 9 to 5 because I know stupid hours you do, but what other things, what your interest away from work?
Family, obviously. I was involved in music many years, but so I'd still dabble a little with different instruments, like listening to music as well, playing. Recently re-engaged with Liverpool Football Club, which I used to have a season to go with my dad every week when I was a kid, and now started going more often, which has been tremendous fun.
Never mind. Hey.
Yeah, well, no one's perfect. And I think keeping fit, going to the gym, hitting things. So it was quite fun. So yeah, I think it's quite normal stuff. I mean, pandemic, I started, spending time in the garden, which I'd never done ever in my life.
Okay.
And if my mother could see me,
she'd be so proud.
She'd laugh her head off.
But I guess you need those switch offs when you are working and building a business. I guess it's important to have those switch offs.
Yes, yes, it absolutely is, and I have not had enough of that for a long period of time, and getting that balance back has been one of the few beneficial side effects, perhaps, of the pandemic was getting that balance back. And
I think that's a familiar story across the board. I think a lot of people have been minding themselves that they need to spend some time themselves and have that time. The last question we always ask all of our guests is about the Deepbridge dinner party. So if you could have 3 guests to invite to the Deepbridge dinner party, no friends or family because we don't offend anybody, but dead or alive, 3 guests to come along to the Deepbridge dinner party, who would those guests be?
I can't take the credit for this because someone came up with it very recently.
Okay.
That I heard, and I think it's probably the wisest one I've heard is probably the Queen.
Okay.
I think looking at the as they said, I think the amount of people that she's met, the experience that she's got historically, right the way through the last 70 years.
And I guess the thing she's never told anyone either.
Yeah, if you could get her to spill the beans, I think that's probably would be one of the most interesting people. I do have, from a musical background, a sporting background, as you can imagine, and a business background, a lot of heroes, people I like to meet. There's always the danger that they may not live up to your expectations. I think with the Queen, I think there's a very good chance she probably would.
Well, I think everyone during the period of mourning and the funeral and everything, everyone spoke to was always about how she absolutely met up to expectations. And so, okay, other than the Queen, music, who would that be then?
I think John Lennon would be interesting.
Yep.
I think, again, there's a fear that you may not hit your expectations.
This is hypothetical, so, he'll be absolutely superb.
I think it'd be interesting. I have had occasion to meet his missus, and that was embarrassing enough by itself, because I do get a little bit starstruck.
I've heard you're the king of selfies, Bernard, so, that's...
I wish. All 3 chins at once, that's my best.
And then kind of thirdly, the sport or business or somebody, is there somebody that you have already met or somebody that you'd love to meet?
I'd love to meet Muhammad Ali. I think it'd be tremendous to have met him as a child. Muhammad Ali, even though it's black and white TVs at the time, he lit up the screen. I think I'm seeing him on Parkinson.
Yeah, absolutely.
Stuff like that. He was just immense character. And I think flawed. The nice thing about it, he was clearly a flawed character as well, but it just makes it more interesting.
Well, I think when you look at it, particularly in the sports world, and I guess entertainment, music, etc., the geniuses usually are flawed in some way, aren't they? So
that makes them even more interesting.
Absolutely. Yeah. Great. Well, Bernard, thank you very much for your time. Really appreciate it. And I know the stuff that you're working on at the moment that you can't talk about, as you alluded to earlier. So it'd be great to get you on at some point once you've got those results published and what have you. That'd be great to speak to you again.
Andrew, thank you very much.
Thanks, Bernard. Thank you for joining us. We look forward to welcoming you to future Deepbridge Discovery podcasts. If there's any topics or subjects you'd like us to discuss in future podcasts, please email us at discovery@deepbridgecapital.com. This podcast was brought to you by Deepbridge Capital LLP. Deepbridge is authorised and regulated by the Financial Conduct Authority. Please note that investments discussed are both illiquid and high risk and won't be suitable for all investors and should be considered as part of a diversified portfolio. The content of this podcast should not be construed as financial or taxation advice. We recommend investors seek appropriate professional financial advice. Any views expressed may no longer be current and may have already been acted upon.